Hi everyone, my name is Deana Driver. I'm an author, editor, and book publisher in Regina, Saskatchewan. I want to speak to you today about the book Flight, Stories of Canadian Aviation by myself, Deana Driver, and contributing writers. There are 35 short stories in this book, all true stories about aviation, people, stories, human interactions. There's adventures, there's assistance, there's some tragedy, there's lots of successes, there's some humor and antics. It's a little bit of everything. And it's volume 1, as you can see at the bottom, and I'm working on volume 2 right now. There probably will be at least 3 more volumes of this series. It's been very well received, and I'm very pleased with this. The impetus for the book came from a book that I previously published called Prairie Pilot, and you can see that at the top of your screen. It's the late Walter Williams. He was a pilot in the Robert Kindersley area of Saskatchewan, and he had a small plane, and as soon as he got his plane, he became sort of an unofficial air ambulance pilot. So he wrote 100 short stories of his adventures. He would land in farmers' fields and pick up pregnant women, injured kids, take them off to the hospital, that sort of thing. Prairie Pilot is available by ebook. You can search by the title, Prairie Pilot, Stories of Walter Williams. And then this book, as soon as I started putting the Prairie Pilot book in front of folks to purchase, they started telling me about other aviation stories, so I knew for several years that there were other wonderful stories out there. And then I started collecting these a few years ago and published it in October 2019. I was privileged to do a number of wonderful interviews. This gentleman is Reg Crash Harrison. He's 97 years old in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and he was a bomber pilot during the Second World War, and he crashed 4 times. So I ended up writing 5 stories about Reg, one about each crash and then one about another really wonderful event that happened related to the war. There are stories of antics. This gentleman in Alberta used an ice cream pail to relieve himself in flight, and this fellow was a smoke jumper, one of the first people to parachute out of a plane to fight fires in northern Saskatchewan. This woman's airplane caught on fire as she had a photographer aboard. I was also privileged to share some stories by my husband's cousin, the late Terry Lynn Lewis, who was a pilot and an air traffic controller and flight instructor in Manitoba. Terry has a wonderful sense of humor, and there are several of his wonderful stories in this book. And then I also was able to interview Captain Greg Wiebe from the Canadian Snowbirds aerobatics team, and he wrote a story about one of his adventures when he was training in Kenya, but also talked to me about flying with the Snowbirds, and he shares a kind of devastating crash that occurred to one of his friends, but also some insight into what it's like to fly with these highly trained, highly skilled aerobatics folks. Then this is one of the crash stories that I spoke about. There are a number of fascinating people from across the prairies. I'm collecting stories for volume 2. If you know someone who is an enthusiast and has stories to share, have them contact me. You can find this book and all of our other wonderful titles at driverworks.ca.